Have you been wondering how these 6 know-it-alls got together? Well, back in 2020, after 6 months of COVID-19 pandemic isolation, Barbara Brackman decided she needed some company. She invited 5 quilty friends to join her for Zoom cocktail parties every other Monday evening in order to discuss the state of the country and maybe some quilts too. So convivial were the Zooms that they decided to gather virtually every week instead of every 2 weeks. Quilt soon became the main focus of these discussions, of course. Questions were raised, pondered, and discussed, debated, and occasionally settled about particular examples that were brought to the party. Julie Silber then declared that surely the public would be fascinated by their discussions. And so the 6 know-it-alls, a tongue firmly in cheek name, was born. It quickly became apparent that technical help was required, so Tara Miller of the Quilt District came on board. After 3 freebie sessions, the 6 know-it-alls, all professional quilt historians with a combined experience of a quarter of a millennium, began to charge for the programs. We're so happy you could join us.
Hi, I'm Barbara Brackman, and I'm one of the 6 know-it-alls, and we have a special guest today, so there's 7 of us. We're going to show you 5 quilts, and we have a topic, masterpiece quilts, which will, I think, really get some good discussion going because one woman's masterpiece is not another's. We're going to start with Debby Cooney, and Debby is, like many of us, an independent scholar, and she explores quilts made near her home in Maryland, and she focuses on the details. And it's pretty amazing what she sees. One of my favorite things she's ever done is she looks at a particular fabric that has hawks on it and has found every quilt that was ever made with that fabric. So Debby, why don't you show us your pile?
This 4-block floral applique appeared at auction in 2018 with a history of ownership by a DuPont family member. It has a crowded composition of massed flowers and curving vines heavy with fruit and blossoms. All the motifs are edged with delicate embroidery and are densely stuffed, many approaching ½ an inch. The stuffed work gives the quilt a really sculptural effect. This overall shot doesn't show this feature, but the detailed photos will. The dark green and the bold red fabrics draw attention to the center section. I'll quote Stella Rubin's words here. Exuberance does not begin to describe the dense design that is so full it has something of an abstract look. The eyes inked in the lower pair of multi-layered roses engages the viewer, saying, "Look at me." The beige vases and flower petals probably were originally purple, which would have given even more visual punch to the effect. In the borders, the daisies and pumpkins on curving vines are more widely spaced and include pastel tones, and they make a nice contrast to the center. This stunning album quilt appeared about a year before Stella's with some of the same heavily stuffed motifs. It was photographed at an antique show at an angle, which allows 3-dimensional padding to stand out. It's corner blocks, it's cornucopia, heart wreath, eagles with flags, all say Baltimore very loudly. Comparison of these two quilts suggests the same maker or workshop. Also notice the apple tree block in the album, and more about that later. The quilts have linked rings that are nearly identical in size and fabrics. And the pumpkins in the fore block appear as yellow and red flowers in its upper vine and in the album. Several well-known Baltimore album quilts are similar in overall effect and in their design. All the elements in this one are stuffed. Its central floral basket and two in the bottom row, which resemble those on the fore blocks. And notice the birds circling the nest. This album and others to follow are associated with German Jewish families that immigrated to Baltimore in the 19th century. This one descended in the Lohmann family from Bavaria. All the blocks are stuffed and include 4 grape clusters that were in the Sorge album and the circle of birds that was in the previous one. Its stuffed layered applique and pumpkin-shaped fruit wreath recall the 4-block quilt. Its center basket was copied from one of Mary Simon's most popular designs found on many of her high-style Baltimore albums. The apple tree suggests a Garden of Eden theme for this and for most of the other album quilts of Jewish provenance. This album of Kathy Erickson's collection was sold with no information, but it is strikingly similar to the Nebraska album. Wow. Barbara, Kathy, and I saw these quilts side by side at the Historical Society and agree with Barbara that they had the same beginnings. Mrs. Josiah Goodman and the date 1850 are embroidered on the back of this album quilt that features animals and insects, as well as vases of flowers, very similar to those of the 4-block quilt. Josiah Goodman was a Baltimore Jewish clothing merchant born in Germany. Some of the quilt's tweeds and velvets may have come from his stock of fabrics. In this quilt, birds circle an elephant, circles are surround a horse, and the apple tree of Eden appears. In the border, posies sit in curves of the vines, as they do in this very similar quilt at the American Folk Art Museum. Again, we see an apple tree, stuffed flowers in vases, cornucopia of the Sorge album. Like the Goodmans, the writers were German Jewish immigrants. The Mexican War hero Samuel Walker, and the flag with eagles also appear in both of these quilts. This exceptional quilt top resembles the 4-block in its crowded composition with linked rings in 2 of the vases and lots of layered applique flowers. It also includes the Baltimore blocks of Captain Walker and the Garden of Eden apple quilts. And in this one, sort of a palm tree, a snake is crawling up its trunk. So here we have birds, animals, fish, and insects all living in harmony. I'm tempted to call all of these quilts masterpieces, but today I'll stick with this 4-block quilt. And to read more about these Jewish Baltimore albums, Rhonda McAllen's paper was in Uncoverings 2006, or you can just Google the name. And there we are. So I don't know if it's a masterpiece to everyone, but it certainly is to me.
Wow.
This is something that may come up in the discussion later, but my consideration for a masterpiece, I mean, there's technical masterpiece, which these clearly are, but is it unique? I mean, you keep on talking about how it's like such and such other quilt, and there's so many similarities. Is it a unique vision? Is it a cultural masterpiece?
Well, I don't suppose I would call this particular one a cultural masterpiece, but I think it's different enough from the others that I would consider this one to be, for me, out of all of them, this one has enough balance that it's not as crowded as some of the others. And I just think the design is marvelous. And I'm just sorry that the stuff work doesn't show, because when you see it in person, it's just this raised composition that is just, it's three-dimensional. So I don't know if that's enough.
Well, masterpiece is taste, and it's going to change. Things that were considered a masterpiece in 1880 are considered rather overblown and overdone and too Victorian right now. So things do change, and then people have their own personal ideas. And I think our ideas of masterpiece are very influenced by our appreciation for design, for balance. We are not overtaken by sentiment as people were in the 19th century, so there are many qualifications and things change.
But I think the originality, which I sense, is what Debbie's going for.
Well, this whole group of quilts has some very original features that I don't think I've seen on anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the whole group as together, I think, has some sort of, I don't know, cultural significance, I guess, is what I'd call it. And of all of those, I like the one of Stella's the best.
That's interesting.
I
remember when you and I and Kathy Erickson were looking at the one in Nebraska, and Kathy brought hers. I mean, we were just knocked out. They are so distinctive. And I think what's important, and which we do not understand, is how this group of German Jewish women in Baltimore shared these ideas. These are strange ideas. I mean, when we started looking at BAQs years ago, these were put off in a separate place because they were different. They were not Mary Evans, the quote style. But we don't know. Did they have a group at the Hadassah? I don't know. Did they sew together? Or was there a workshop that sold these?
Yeah, that's a big question with these. The only real name we have with these German Jewish quilts is Rachel Walter Myers, whose name did come down with two of her quilts to the Baltimore Museum of Art. The others, no name is known for them. And it's certainly possible that they or a group that they particularly liked shared ideas, and all of them bought one or two.
Oh, that's true. Because we always forget the buying. Someone's making them, and then they are a luxury item that other people can afford.
Debbie, I have a question. I wrote something on the Reiter quilt many years ago that turns out to be not completely accurate. But my question is, I remember that in the family, it was said that the makers, a mother and daughter, were from McKeesport, Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah. But Rhonda and I do not think that we think the quilt originated with the writers in Baltimore. There were plenty of writers there, and it has the Mexican War figure from Baltimore, Samuel Walker. So to us, there's no possible way that two women who emigrated to this country later than 1850 and ended up in McKeesport, Pennsylvania in the 1890s would have made that quilt.
Mm-hmm.
So
what you're saying is that the family's idea that those two women made the quilt is incorrect.
I believe it is incorrect.
Okay.
Debbie, is it still three-dimensional? I mean, does it still have puff to it or heft to the quilt?
Are you talking about the Reiter quilt?
The Stella quilt, I'm sorry.
Oh, it's very heavily stuffed. That one and the second one I showed are so thick that, I mean, they come up like this. Some of the rest of them have some stuffed work in them, but those two are overstuffed.
Overstuffed.
And they must have been regarded as masterpieces because they are both in excellent condition. They haven't got a scratch on them or any popping. So they obviously were put away and not used.
Mm. they're all gorgeous. I don't know which one I would vote for, but
Yeah, which would be the masterpiece of the masterpieces there.
yeah.
I kind of like the samplers. And I talked about your attention to detail. The circle of birds, it's not something you notice, but as we have looked, it's where you see it. You don't see it anywhere else, that circle of birds.
There are so many motifs on these quilts that don't seem to come up anywhere else.
I think we could at least say it's a master designer.
Okay.
Maybe we find some different categories or subcategories that, different people may be making these up, but certainly there's a similar eye that seems to be behind creating these designs. And even if they get copied and repeated, the basic vision of the designer is still at a master level. And so maybe that's one way of parsing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Stella quilt, if I saw all of those quilts in one show after I picked myself up off the floor and went home, the Stella quilt is probably the one I would remember, meaning as like, but different. And so if memorable is part of, particularly people who've seen lots of quilts, maybe that's an element in there too.
Well, I think that's quite valid, because some of the others are so crowded that it can't really imprint, or it imprints too much, so it kind of
Your eye can't rest.
yes, it can't rest. It can't take it all in.
Negative space.
Mm-hmm.
So what were the dimensions? Was it that
Large.
quilt the same size as the other?
About 100 inches square.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
Wow.
I think I'd be afraid of that quilt. It
It's
might come out
massive.
and grab me. If all that stuff works. We're going to talk next with Alden O'Brien. And Alden is the curator of costumes and textiles at the DAR Museum in Washington, D.C. And she does many quilt exhibits. And also she's a specialist in costumes. And one of my favorite things that she does is she compares historical costuming to dramatic costuming in films and movies. And it's surprising. So Alden, what are we going to talk about for a masterpiece today?
Well, today we are going to talk about, as usual, a quilt in the DAR Museum collection. And it's a quilt made by Mary Lloyd Key, who's the wife of, Francis Scott Key of Star Spangled Banner fame. And the Taylors and Lloyds and Keys were all early prominent families of Maryland. And of course, in that area, that meant that their wealth was derived from the enslavement of African Americans. And in fact, Francis Key was really aggressively pro-slavery, using his position as district attorney of the city of Washington to defend slavery and attack abolitionists. I mean, he was really a horrible, horrible man. But for our purposes, what that means is that Mary Key had lots of enslaved assistants around the house, allowing her to be very free to play with fabric. And she also may have had help with the actual piecing of this counterpane. And it's important, I think, to consider the invisible assistance behind the scenes that allowed these women the freedom to create, and to imagine that maybe Black hands did some of the actual work. I wouldn't be at all surprised. So it may have been made in Maryland and or Washington, because they had property in both places. And we don't know exactly how much time Mary spent in each place. And this counterpane was in the Eye on Elegance exhibit, where each quilt's label will talk about daughters and servants, enslaved and free, who could work on this. But in any case, you can go and zoom onto it and see a lot of close-ups of the fabric. And I counted over 65 different cotton prints in this, in Mary Key's quilt. And as you can see, it's got the framed medallion layout that is very common in the, and almost universal in the first third or so of the century. century. And the square medallion on point was very common in the mid-Atlantic and around and south and around Maryland. And of course, technically Mary Key's design has the center circle at the very center, but it's the next layer with the on-point square that really makes the impression, similar to this applique one here, or this one that's a combination of applique and piecing here. And then she has these mariner's compasses in the center and anchoring the inner border. And then, of course, all the triangles formed by this have similar on-point medallion layouts as well. And Barbara's blog a couple of years ago also pointed out that these piece triangle layouts are a regional feature of the Maryland area. So we aren't sure where the red and white one in the last slide is from, but the family had roots in Virginia, so it probably came from there. And here are two others that Barbara featured in her blog. So you see that Mary Key isn't doing something completely unique, but she does make it her own. And here's a comparison of all 5 that I've shown you. But she kind of takes it to a new level with all of these triangles. I counted 3,876 of the small triangles, plus the Maryland compass pieces, and 4,445 pieces overall, although I didn't actually count exactly where the seams were in the sashing, so that doesn't even count that. But it's not just this number of pieces that makes it perhaps a masterpiece, which we can discuss later. Her rows of triangles, which form the larger triangles, I'm going to call them a set, this larger triangle with all these rows, are in 3 different sizes. There are 10 rows in the inner squares, 6 in the smaller corners, and 11 rows in the outer borders. And they all may look random, but they are in fact very carefully arranged. And if you, I just took this one as an example. There are a couple of different patterns that she does, but this is one of the patterns. And so you have A, B, B, C, D, C, and so on. And you see that they're all very, very symmetrical. And at the bottom you have 10, so you can't have it sort of mirroring each other, but it ends up being pretty much just pink, brown, pink, brown, pink, brown, using a couple of different pinks. So it's very well thought out, and there'll be up to 15 different prints in one of the sets. And you can see here, some of them start with the green at the top of the triangle, and that's a different, that overall will have a slightly different pattern, and the others have the red at the top. But there's a repetition to it, and there's a real coherence, and she spent a lot of time thinking about it, even if it looks random. When you look carefully, it's not. So pull out a bit to look how she has narrower sashing in the sides of the outer border, but then she doubles that in the corners. So you've got an extra kind of weight there on the corners, and that makes that overall X stronger. And it sort of echoes the width of the inner medallion border. So it's sort of as if those 4 sides in the red border in the center on point one have kind of split up and rearranged themselves facing out, outside, facing out towards the outer edges. And it kind of gives it a certain energy, I think. And then the 5 compasses, of course, act as anchors and add interest, and those are not easy to piece, and they're also piped around the edges. So it's not easy to make all these thousands of elements work together perfectly, and in fact the quilt does not lie flat. Perhaps that's one reason why this was finished as a counterpane rather than being finished as a quilt. But the skill in planning and arranging all the areas with all these triangles, and the creativity in how to assemble the design, as well as the commitment to carrying it out, even if it doesn't lie perfectly flat, I feel may allow this to qualify as a masterpiece. So discuss.
Wow.
Well, you know, I'm fascinated by the Key family, the Lloyd Key giant family. I would, when there's money again for shows in this world, I want to do a show on the Key family as telling the story of America, from Francis Scott Key down to F. Scott Fitzgerald. And they made a lot of quilts, that family. And I think it's very important to note that her husband had died, creep as he was. But they, you know, it's not politically correct, their attitudes on slavery. I mean, it got worse. Their brother-in-law was Roger Taney, the guy behind the 18th.
Oh God, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
I mean, they just they were on the wrong side of the debate.
These were not people we would invite over for dinner to talk politics. But it's fascinating. And her husband had died when she worked on this. And then the thing that happened next, having your husband die is bad. But her son was the district attorney in Baltimore. And he was having an affair with a woman whose husband objected, and he shot her son dead in front of the White House. And she died several years later. I think it just broke her heart. So they're a fascinating family with that murder, and then with all the descendants that go down to the fabulous F. Scott Fitzgerald, Francis Scott Key Fitzgerald.
Is that right? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And of course, he's slightly problematic too. But anyway,
no,
that.
Sometimes it's an inherited. And creativity equals a little bit of bipolarism sometimes.
I wonder if
so I would go with you on it as a masterpiece. You know, even if it doesn't lie flat, I know it wouldn't win a prize at a state fair because they'd say, doesn't lie flat.
And I'd want to say, well, you try getting 3,800 pieces of fabric to lie flat.
Right.
But Kyra, what were you going to say?
Well, one, I wonder if anyone in the family, the Keys family broadly, still quilts. I love, Alden, how you mathematically saw the pattern. I love that. The analyst in me.
Thank you.
Thinking, yes, I could see Excel and calculators.
Yeah. Well,
she didn't really count those.
The first row is one, and the second row is more than that. And you know, you can count it as squares because it alternates the white and the printed. So you can count the number of squares diagonally, or you can count it by the rows. But then you risk. I spent a lot of time playing Where's Waldo to figure that out.
He sold like the A and the BB and the BDC. Picture that it had the one where you showed the pattern, and then it had something inverted, and I can like, yeah, there's the A and the BB and the CDC. I was like,
yeah, if you look at it, it's like the outer one is the A, and then the next one in is the B, and the next one in is the C. So she's mirroring it basically. Yeah. And I mean, that comes from my years as an English minor of, scanning poetry of, the sonnet goes ABBA, I'm used to sort of figuring out patterns with letters that way. But when you spend that much time with it, you start getting in the mind of the creator and seeing she really had something in mind here. She knew what she was doing.
Yeah.
I can see that. I'm going to be the devil's advocate.
Go ahead. Well, and I hedged my bets. I said we may think this is a masterpiece. I don't know what our criteria are, but shoot.
I think she is taking a bunch of very familiar elements and creating something different with it, but I don't think of that as a unique vision.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
The other thing, Barbara brought up the interesting point that a masterpiece isn't about sentiment. And I would argue with that maybe it's not sentiment as in sentimental, but I think there's emotion involved in being a masterpiece.
Okay, not just a mathematical calculation.
Right. I mean, I think there's technical masterpiece, but to be a masterpiece, there's got to be more.
I think that's
I think it's got to be unique. I think there's got to be a personal emotion invested in it.
Okay.
And
I think that's absolutely fair. And, you're being devil's advocate. And yet I was hesitant when we decided on this theme. I was thinking, what am I going to use? And I decided on this because, you know, the many elements and the technical, you know, the time spent on the arrangement, but I am not going to get on a hill and fight over
You're not
this
gonna die on
necessarily.
this
I
hill.
think it's an exquisite, you know, it's a masterful quilt. I'm not sure it's a masterpiece quilt.
Yeah.
But I think that seeing this is, you know, saying, is this a masterpiece, is helping us refine our definition of what do we think we need for it. And I think your point about there has to be an emotional impulse in the creator is very valid, and I don't see that here. So I think that's a valid, so let's take that into the next ones and see how that applies.
We might be crossing over from craft to art too.
Well, that was the other question. Are we
And that's
talking
another
crafty
loaded
art?
debate.
And what is art?
Well,
We may have to address that in a different know-it-all session, but
All right, what is art? All right.
yeah.
We'll work on
Moving
that.
on.
No,
Okay,
no,
moving
well,
on.
moving on, Mary Kay.
can I just say one thing? It's the most
You can say that.
architectural quilt I think I've ever seen. And the reason why it stands out above the others that you showed was the careful arrangement of those fabrics. It looks like an Italian palazzo floor,
Mm.
and it's perfectly arranged to bring your eye to the center with
Yeah.
a fountain in the middle. I see, and 4 in the corners. If you look at it again and just think about an architectural book from that period, you'll see it. So I think it's
Yeah,
I think it
I think
qualifies.
it's technically masterful.
Yes, it's
Absolutely.
technically, and it's far and above the other quilts that she showed with fields of triangles, because they're so carefully chosen.
Right.
And it's got a perfect design, which I think probably came from a Renaissance example.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Who are we going
Mary
to do
Kay.
next?
With our friend Lynne Bassett. Now, Lynne, like many of us, is an independent scholar. She has done many terms as curators with museums, and she's done many exhibits. And one of my favorites was Home Front and Battlefield on Quilts from the Civil War, for which she won a prize in 2012 with Madeline Shaw. So Lynne is going to talk to us about a very interesting quilt from her special area, which is New England. So go to it, Lynne.
You'll notice that I'm not wearing exactly the same outfit that I was earlier. I am having serious PowerPoint troubles that we haven't quite been able to overcome, but we've made them better. So thank you to Tara for re-recording me, and I will get going here. My topic today is this Paul family quilt, which is in the collection, the MFA Boston. And it was actually kind of serendipitous that I'm having troubles and I'm re-recording, because since we first recorded it, I went to the MFA's current quilt exhibition, Fabric of a Nation. And I saw this quilt again in person for the first time in close to 20 years. So I have a little better understanding of it now than I did when we originally recorded. So let me give you some context. Here we have another one of these embroidered wool quilts. I wanted you to see some other examples so that you would understand why I think the Paul family quilt is so special. These embroidered wool quilts are generally from New England. They're generally from the early 19th century. They're pretty rare. I've only found maybe about a dozen examples, but here is one quilt that was on my bed. Look at this. It was on my bed because the auctioneer brought it to me when it came on the market for me to examine and write a description of. So this is from the Dyer family of Maine. They were from North Haven, Maine. And this quilt is embroidered with wool, I think possibly homespun wools in the diamond shaped blocks. A lot of the motifs are pretty standard, you know, the pot of flowers. it is really interesting that it has codfish painted on or embroidered on it. Cod was a major industry in that area of Maine, and you can read more about these embroidered wool quilts in Lori LaBar's recent book, Maine Quilts. As I think I said, most of these quilts seem to come out of Maine, not all of them, but this seems to be the state where these generally came from. Also, I wanted you to see the eagle. It's pretty primitive, but I think that shield-shaped body really speaks to it being the American eagle, and plus what it looks like arrows in its talons. And here we have a sailing ship. So the Dyer family quilt is really speaking to its the fishing industry, the community identity, and a national identity. So it's a special quilt. I think these quilts grow out of another New England style of quilting, which is the pieced wool quilt that appear in the late 18th, early 19th century. I think these are kind of a transition from the whole cloth wool quilts to the smaller pieced calico quilts. Another New England thing is the embroidered wool table mats. So these embroidered wool quilts really combine these two other traditions. Here's an example of one of these wool and embroidered quilts that is not from Maine. I bought this one from Julie Silber for the collection of the Wadsworth Athenaeum. This is from the Penniman family of Massachusetts. And it also has, you know, the pot of flowers, not too dissimilar from those we saw on the Dyer family. And the bird, a lot of these have birds. I really love this one because it has a edging made of shag, which is like a faux fur made of wool that you see on trimmings on coats and such. This is a really beautiful one. It's a little more simple, but the embroidery is just so fine and lovely. And you see how these also tend to have that New England shape of the cutout corners. This is the latest one. Oh, this one from Palermo, Maine, Delphos Turner. This is the earliest one. This one is dated 1818. This is another similar example, not exactly. This is from the Civil War period. This is from the Massachusetts Quilt Documentation Project, the Emily Wiley Monroe quilt. This one is a little different in that it is applique. I mean, she just really pulled out the stops on this. This is applique, it's embroidered, it's pieced. I think in a way this one is quite the wonderful masterpiece as well. The thing that I love about these quilts, for those of you who know that I am into historic clothing too, is that you can identify the types of clothing that the fabric was originally used for. You see a lot of piecing in the backgrounds especially. So this background fabric here is exactly what you would see in men's work trousers. So here we are at my nominee for a masterpiece quilt. This is the Paul family quilt from South Solon, Maine. You can see this right now. If you're in the Boston area, run, do not walk to the MFA's current quilt exhibition, Fabric of a Nation. This quilt also was on my bed. I got to see this one up close and personal when it came up for auction about 20 years ago or so. This quilt, I think, is special for so many reasons. It is a really interesting piece design that I've only ever seen in one other quilt. The thing that's really special about this, though, is the embroidery and the designs of the embroidery. Here's a larger view. I should tell you that if you can't get to Boston, you can buy the book. by the curators of the Fabric of a Nation. It's a really special exhibition, and it's a wonderful book, and I strongly encourage you to have it on your shelf. Okay, so here we have the Paul family quilt, and the family originally called this the 1812 quilt because it had these little soldiers around the edges. But if you look carefully at it, and oh, and here's the little soldier. These are so cool. This is, I think, must be a looped running stitch where they leave a big loop and then they cut the loop, and so you get this shaggy surface. It's really clever, and it gives such a nice texture to it. And then here's Catherine Rice Paul, who is probably the maker of this quilt. She embroidered a profile of herself on the quilt. Now, when I was looking at and remembering this earlier, there are 4 of these profiles. And I thought, you know, she was really showing herself 4 times on the quilt. But when I saw it again in person, I realized they're all a little different. So these are all different family members. And here she is sometime later, probably around the 1860s or so. Oh, and I love the detail in here, the bullion stitches, the embroidery that creates the sausage curls on the side of her head. So this is a very 1830s fashion. You can tell from the fashions of the people embroidered on it that it's not 1812, it's around 1830. And so here she has her mother-in-law. This is her husband with his fuzzy head and his sideburns. And here are 2 children. This is another thing that I was mistaken when I was first writing and thinking about this quilt. I thought, okay, there's a butterfly. This is so sad. The butterfly is a symbol of resurrection. These 2 children must be deceased. Well, in fact, all of their 11 children lived to adulthood. So sometimes a butterfly is just a butterfly. I think that's just probably, as the curators say, an emblem out of a children's book or something. And again, the fashions here are very 1830-ish. And then there are these other wonderful motifs. I love the turkeys sitting in a tree here, and an owl, and there's a llama and a cat. Again, worked with that fuzzy looped, cut loop running stitch. And you can see again how these fabrics have been reused from a prior purpose. I just love that about these quilts. They're so imaginative and resourceful. And then here, my final slide is this interesting building with some type of bird of prey sitting on top. And they suggest that it may be the dome of the South Solon Congregational Church. Could be, and it could also just be something of great imagination. I love these little, they're like balloon-like. I suspect they're probably parade lanterns or something on the sides. And I think that this is a masterpiece quilt because not just because it's masterfully created, but it's such an individual, unique vision of the maker, and it has the emotion of the love of her family profiled in it. So I think it's the whole package. It's beautifully constructed, it's beautifully designed, and it has meaning. It's unique, but it has meaning. I know that the MFA Boston considers this one of the masterpieces of their folk art collection as well. So that's my argument for the Paul family quilt.
I think one of the adjectives I haven't heard in relationship to masterpiece that this quilt has, particularly these seams that are embroidered, is the word discovery. As somebody who looks at the quilt, I just want to discover the next little thing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a great thought. Right.
Yeah.
And that might be a sub-theme here, is looking at very small details and then discovering things. You have to look, and you have great photos of it, and you've seen it. You know, I've seen it, but I never knew what those pictures were. So I think once again, you have showed us an aspect of New England quilts which are rather underdocumented. that we hadn't seen before. That's great. And
Yeah,
I was like,
I
when you
have
win, it's a masterpiece.
I have loved that quilt for, gosh, 15 years now, I think, is about when it got laid out on my bed at my house. And I got to
Okay, we are suitably jealous.
yes, yes.
Right.
But she embroidered herself 4 times in
Huh.
that quilt. You know, her
I
profile
think you'll
appears
be
4
able to
times,
see it well.
and then she's
I
got her
think-
husband and her mother-in-law in the center, but and in addition to the children. But you know, I just think it's such wonderful imagination
Right.
and love. I think there's a lot of love in that quilt.
Yeah.
Let's talk about where we can see the details. You can post them on our Facebook.
Oh yeah, yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah. Well, let's put them up there on the, we
On
have
the
2
Facebook,
Facebook
yeah.
pages.
That'll be
because-
helpful.
We have 3
That's
Facebook
great.
pages because can't help it. I want to say one more thing about sentiment versus emotion. Emotion, I'll buy. Sentiment is artificial and it changes with time. And so this is an emotional quilt. And there is sentiment in the family, which of course never changes. But the whole idea of sentimental art, I mean, I have a lot of art history background, and that's what modern art is. It rejects sentimentality for design, for genuine emotion, rather than an artificial view. So
I think
point.
sentimental and sentimentality is sort of milking the emotion for
Exactly.
for a phony response. It's trying to
only
force a response, whereas emotion is a true and genuine response to a real stimulus.
And
Does
these
that make
are all-
sense?
family.
and these
family
are all
and
related. These are all related to the idea of nostalgia as well, right?
Mhm.
And
That's
nostalgia
fair,
is
yeah.
full of sentiment and
Yeah.
yeah, and myth.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah.
Other things we've talked about, the myth in particular. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
this
this is
Okay.
probably a
quilt
good
is-
segue.
the
A
quilt is
segue
down.
into
I
our
think
next,
Debbie wanted to say something,
I
but
wanted to
she's
say
muted.
something.
Debbie. She's
Sorry.
Well, I just wanted to say that there's an authenticity about this quilt that's just unmistakable. And to
Mhm.
see something, you know, so present and kind of raw, but decorated so beautifully. I mean, there is decoration as well as authenticity here. Yeah, I have to agree that this is unlike any I've ever seen before. And yeah, a masterpiece.
I win.
So Lynn, this quilt,
Kyra hasn't spoken yet. She's
That's
gonna
right.
go.
No,
yes,
no.
and Kyra might win. We
Lynn
know
is
that.
not
We're all looking forward to
competition, not a
Kyra.
competition.
We can
still
have
have
several
a
It's
few
not
more
a
minutes.
competition.
we still have
Okay.
a few more minutes. I wanted to ask, so Lynn, let's just be sure, this quilt is in the exhibit,
Collection. It is in the exhibition. It is in the book.
in the book.
It is in the permanent collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston.
Great.
And
That's a good
was
place
it
for
published before in one of the state quilt projects? No.
It
Yes.
is in
I
the
have seen
main
it.
book now. It is in the main book now, but that just came out this year.
No, I've seen it before. It's been shown. You probably in Museum of Fine Arts database.
Mm.
You can see it.
Well,
So-
but
Published.
has it gotten into another book?
No, I don't think it's in another book. No.
I mean, I published an essay about it in the auction catalog.
Mm. Oh,
Well,
what
some
was
of
that?
these publications will add, right? We usually do that
Right.
at the end of
Oh,
our.
we'll do a bibliography
Yeah.
that you can read. And Kyra will do that because you have a lot of
Okay.
books. Well, we get to move on here. We have Kyra Hicks as our guest know-it-all, and she certainly is. You know, she's another independent scholar like the rest of us. I notice she has a real job that has nothing to do with this. But
Absolutely.
what I'm impressed by is that she shares her work on a blog and on her Facebook or on her website. which is black threads. Do check that out. We'll put that on our bibliography. And she's also a big advocate of self-publishing, which is not an easy thing to do. And so maybe some of you own her books. She shares her work on African-American quilts. And Mary Kay and I are our mentor when we were young girls in our 20s and 30s was Questa Benberry, and she told us what we should be doing. She's long gone, but we still go,
Yes,
Questa
on
said.
our shoulders.
So I think Kyra's following Questa's footsteps too. So she also makes quilts, and her stuff has been shown at the Renwick, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, the Wordsworth Athenaeum. I was very impressed with all this. So let's hear from Kyra. I know what she's going to talk about. And I'm in charge of sharing the screen here. There it is. Excuse me. All right. So this is Kyra. Kyra, just say next when you want to go on.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here on the panel with all the know-it-alls. So thank you so much. In the topic of masterpieces, one of the two quilts I'd like to share with you is from Harriet Powers. And as Lynne had just mentioned, there's an exhibit currently at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston until January of 2022. And it's called Fabric of a Nation, American Quilt Stories. And it will show American quilts and coverlets spanning 300 years, including, Barbara, if you can go to the next slide.
Yeah.
Both of Harriet Powers' known surviving quilts. Come on, if you're a quilter,
Yes.
this is like together for the first
to see
time.
them together.
Yeah, together for the first time, maybe since they were in Mrs. Powers' own home in Athens, Georgia. Love it. Yes. I mean, how amazing is that?
I get to see it on Friday.
Totally jealous.
I'm seeing it on Wednesday.
Yeah,
I'm seeing it December 26th.
I need to make my reservations to go.
you do.
I do. I know I do. So for those of you watching that may not know, as I calm down, on the left, we have the Bible quilt that Mrs. Powers stitched in 1886 is the reference, but I actually think it was probably a little bit earlier in 1885. That quilt is at the Smithsonian. Well, right now it's in Boston, but it's in the possession of and ownership of the Smithsonian National Museum of American History here in Washington, D.C. On your right side of the screen is the Pictorial quilt, which is what it's named now. It was stitched around 1898, and it is in the ownership of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. But it was once owned by the Reverend Charles Hall, who at the time was the chairman of the board of trustees for Atlanta University in Georgia. So when we talk about masterpieces, I'm going to be a little bit different because I'm not a historian that will tell you about fabrics and patterns and so forth. I mostly love the work and the people. And so when we talk about masterpieces in this context, I'm going to share with you who touched them, who loved them to get to the museums to be the masterpieces that we now admire, if that's okay. Barbara, do you mind going to the next slide?
No.
So part of a masterpiece might be who purchases it. And so the question that I ask is, how much do you think was paid for that pictorial quilt that is owned by the Boston Museum of Fine Arts? Can you imagine somebody actually had to pay money for that? And we know that it was a gift given to Reverend Charles Hall. And we think it's because he was to become president of a seminary school in New York. And that was a gift given to him by some women from Atlanta University who saw the Harriet Powers Bible quilt in another exhibit. They saw it, they were amazed, and maybe they saw what they thought was a masterpiece at the time, the Bible quilt, was amazed and commissioned her to make this quilt for Dr. Hall. And so you can still see the Bible themes, right? So in the upper right is Christ being baptized by John the Baptist and the dove coming down from heaven. To the left of that is Adam and Eve and the serpent. So there's different scenes that you can probably recognize. The lower right in the bottom corner on the right, the crucifixion with Christ in the center and the two thieves on either side of him. But how much would you pay for it?
I know it was insultingly low, wasn't it?
Well, the Bible quilt, the other one, the one that the Smithsonian has, it was on exhibit, and a woman by the name of Jenny Smith wanted to purchase the other Bible quilt, and she offered Harriet Powers $10 at first, and Harriet Powers said no. And it was
Now
around,
that's equivalent to 1,000, maybe.
But still, well, not, maybe not.
No,
quite
not
a thousand.
really.
Maybe not that much.
yeah, well, and then Harriet Powers sold the Bible quilt eventually a number of years later for $5. It's okay, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, good. Wait a minute. I'm going too fast.
That's it, that's fine. So let me tell you the story of the purchase of the pictorial quilt, because in fact, the museum didn't buy it. It was a gift. On the left-hand side, you'll see a photograph. I love this photograph. I had to find some way to use it. I love this photograph. This is love. This is Reverend and Mrs. Basil Hall on their 50th wedding anniversary. And one of their daughters had loaned me this to put in my book about Harriet Powers. And Dr. Hall was the eldest son of Dr. Charles C. Hall. And so when Dr. Hall, who was also a pastor, when he passed away and his wife passed away, the quilt was in their family home, and it came to the next generation, of which Basil Hall was the eldest. And I have been to that home. It still is in Westport, Massachusetts. It's called Sinton House. It is now not in the family. It was just sold within like the last 10 years outside of the family. But when I went in 2008-ish, the family still owned the home, and the room where they had the quilt, believe it or not, it was tacked on the walls. So the pictorial quilt was tacked, I mean, literally tacked on the wall. And if you were to see the quilt itself, you see the holes still there of the tacks. The family loved the quilt so much that when I went to visit the home, even though the quilt wasn't there, the room that it was in, they had memorabilia about the quilt and signage that said that the family once owned the quilt. So Reverend Basil Hall was getting on in age, needed a little bit of money from what I've heard in the family. And he took the quilt he drove it down to Boston to the Museum of Fine Arts. And he actually showed up, no appointment, and said he would like to sell the quilt if the museum was interested. And in that bundle was a photograph of Harriet Powers, the one that we know today, that came from the Hall family, as well as a board that has note cards on it with information about the quilt. So each of the blocks were described in these note cards. What I think is interesting is when you think about the Bible quilt that the Smithsonian had, what happened, Jenny Smith recorded from Harriet Powers what each of the squares meant. And that documentation was in fact sent with the Bible quilt to the Smithsonian when the Smithsonian acquired it. So anyway, Reverend Hall took the quilt down to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. He was met by the curator there who was interested in the quilt and ended up showing the quilt to the gentleman on the far right, Maxim Karalik. And what's interesting is you'll see the picture of Martha Codman Karalik. She actually married Maxim Karalik. Look at their birth dates on the right.
Yeah.
It was like
Ooh, cougar.
there was like a 35-year difference. And when they got married, it raised eyebrows in the Boston, Massachusetts area because he was so much older than him. But everything that I've read said he was entirely devoted to her and stayed that way for the 20 years of their marriage until she passed away. But they both were collectors of American fine art, or excuse me, early American art. And they have, over the years, when Mrs. Cotman was alive, and even afterwards, Mr. Karalik continued to give pieces, important pieces to the museum, and such that it's now the M&M Karalik collection. So let's go to the next slide. Still trying to figure out how much was paid for the quilt. But before we do that, I've got to show you one thing, because remember we said masterpieces involve discovery. When you see the quilt, I want you to look at for something. On the left side, that's just a detail from one of the blocks in the pictorial quilt. You notice the eyes where Harriet Powers either fabric or stitched the eyes, right? So there's a piece of fabric and then embroidered, I couldn't think of that word, embroidered the eyes. Same quilt, this middle block, come on. Who would draw curly cues?
Oh my God.
Draw curly cues on an animal. Really?
Don't let the children alone with the
Oh my God.
If you look, especially Dr. Regina, and I apologize, I cannot think of her last name. She's going to kill me when she hears this. She wrote a book that has the patterns of the blocks. And if you look, and I say that because there's close-ups of each of the blocks. If you have a picture, you will see other eyes in the pictorial quilt that have these kind of curly cues or drawn on eyes that are not like the ones on the left.
Wow.
I met Robert Utter, who is one of the great grandsons of Dr. Hall's. And he was a child when the family still owned the quilt. And he remembers he and his sister getting a big pen and drawing on the pictorial quilt.
Ouch.
Yeah. I just laughed. He used to own a bookstore in Rhode Island, and I just laughed. And we went, and I had some pictures, obviously, of both quilts. And he was like, see, this is what we did. It was marvelous. And so then when I finally went to the museum and they pulled out the quilt for me to see, I pointed out, okay, here are the tacks. I know which house that this quilt was tacked onto. And then here I know who did the drawing, who embellished on the pictorial quilt. That still doesn't get us to how much did they pay for this masterpiece. So let's go back to that purchase price. Do you know the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston had no idea how much was paid for the quilt? I've looked in the files, it is not there. And by chance, after a conversation with Adolfo Cavallo, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, I did speak with him. He was the textile curator in 1960, and he was the one who received Basil Hall when Reverend Hall brought the quilt and asked if the museum would purchase it. And it was Mr. Cavallo who had felt that the quilt was be of more prestige if it was part of the Kerlick collection and not simply a museum acquisition. And so it was Mr. Cavallo who then said and shared the quilt with Mr. Kerlick. And it was Mr. Kerlick who then said, I love this, and wrote a letter to the Hall family, or Reverend Hall, to say, yes, he would like to purchase the quilt.
Wow.
And so and the reason why I'm showing this picture in the photograph on the left is in the Museum of the Massachusetts Historical Society, I'm sorry, not the museum, but in the Massachusetts Historical Society, not far from the museum, they have the Kerlick and Codman family papers. And it is in those papers that there's correspondence between Mr. Kerlick and Reverend Hall. Now, why there's a letter there from Reverend Hall that went to Mr. Cavallo, other than Reverend Hall maybe sent a copy of it to Mr. Kerlick, I don't know what happened, but I've actually seen the letter in the Historical Society. I just want to share with you a quick quote. Reverend Hall wrote to the curator at the museum, I have just received a letter from Mr. Kerlick in which he tells me that he is inclined to acquire, get this, our old quilted bed cover, and that he is prepared to offer $500 for its purchase. He goes on to say that he did accept, that this price was fine. But one of the lines that I thought was marvelous, it said, it would be good for us to realize that this old treasure, which they tacked on the walls in their house, will be safely guarded into the future and available to students to study, and available to students of American folklore. Signed, Reverend Hall. Can you imagine that maybe part of a masterpiece is something that somebody is so emotionally attached to that they want to share it? for generations to come. And they do things that are positive to make that happen.
We need more of that.
Thank you.
Yes, and then
Beautiful.
just so that we can all see, the other thing about being a masterpiece is maybe just being a masterpiece to the creator is good enough. And Mrs. Powers was quoted as saying that the Bible quilt, the one on the left, was the darling offspring of her brain.
Cool.
That's my vote.
All right.
Okay,
I think
okay, that's
it gets my
masterpiece.
vote.
There's two masterpieces.
It is a masterpiece. It's an artistic and emotional vision that she carries out with conviction and clarity and power. There's a lot of power in that cloth.
And
Well
absolutely
named.
unique. It's absolutely
It's
unique.
absolutely unique. It's her vision. There are recognizable iconographic scenes, but some of them I'm struggling to say, I don't know if that's Jonah or is that an Old Testament story I don't recognize. So some of it is recognizable iconography. Some of it is from her own vision. It's packed with meaning. It's packed with memory and emotion and power. I just find these, I'm afraid I'm going to start to cry when I see these.
I think
Emotion, but not
True
sentimental.
emotion.
and you know, the other thing about these two quilts is the documentation that went
Yes.
with them from the very beginning. To
Yes.
be able to touch the work of an ex-slave, or was she just born into
No,
slavery?
she was a slave.
And a slave. That's the emotion coming through.
and
I think we're going to have to move on to.
Kudos to Kyra for pulling
Yeah.
together so
No, we
much
need
of
to talk
that,
about
you
this.
know,
We can
in
go
her
on a little
books and
longer,
all,
okay.
for doing the background research on those.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, I
And
think
Quest to Benberry.
And
And
yeah,
there are a lot of people. But
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
what I loved about Kyra was that she picked up and kept the story going. She has found some amazing pieces of information that really add to the story. And I'm sure there may be still more to come, but it's
That,
the two of them
when I
are
look
in
at those
very
kind of,
good hands, very good hands.
you look at masterpiece quilts and go, that's not her first quilt. What else did she make?
Yeah.
Oh, all right, we do have to go
Yeah.
on because we do have a time limit. And so we have our last presenter, Julie Silber, and she is a quilt collector and a quilt dealer, and she's brokered and sold many masterpiece quilts to different museums and to important collectors, but she keeps a few for herself that she really likes. So she's gonna talk about masterpiece quilts.
Can you see that, y'all?
Yep.
Yeah.
I like it.
So I'm going to talk briefly about two quilts. The first one being this, anonymously unidentified quilt maker. It's now in the collection of the International Quilt Museum in Nebraska. It was a gift of Joanna S. Rose, the woman who was the owner of at least 651 red and white quilts, bequeathed to the museum. I'm presuming it's at the museum. That's what we've heard, is that her collection went there. This is a quilt that I bought at a flea market, at an outdoor antique market about 25 years ago. And I'm not even sure I need to say very much about why it might be considered a masterpiece. We can see that it has this strong folk art aesthetic to it. It's beautifully balanced. I'm just going to show you some details because I don't think it's, I unfortunately don't have details without my watermark on it. I once owned it and failed to remove the watermark. In any case, you can see that it has human figures. It's pictorial. This guy being what, a railroad guy, I presume? Animal. I watermarked this one twice. That's how good I thought that one was. Other animals, all interspersed alternately with these baskets. I'm going to go back now to the full quilt. There's the full quilt, and we could talk about why it might qualify as a masterpiece. But what I really want to do is go on to a quilt that would not be so perhaps easy to identify in that way, and just talk a little bit about it. A few years ago, I think it was 2012, I did a show at the National Cowgirl Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. An interesting place to do a quilt show, but it was a very interesting experience. And this was the quilt that they chose for the poster. The name of the show was Off the Wall, Maverick Quilts. And at another time, and perhaps even before today, we talked a little bit about whether they're really Maverick or not. But at the time, that was the name that I chose for them or took for them. And this is, the idea of the show was to show 3 examples of a particular pattern, one being standard, and that, so 9 patches. This was the standard one. Going forward for a second here, this was the one that we called one-off. Another 9-patch quilt, in this case, with this big, beautiful pink X going through it. And then we went to the one that was off the wall. And I'm going to go back just for a second to show you that the way the museum was organized, it was impossible for us to show the third one, being the one with the X in it. It's actually on the back side of this display item. Yeah. So standard, one-off, and then Maverick off the wall. So let's talk about it for a minute. I'm not a quilt maker, and I think that makes me unique to this group. I'm not sure. I think all of you make quilts, but not I.
Oh.
This is a quilt made of 9 patches and rectangles. And what I find absolutely fascinating about it was how the quilt maker viewed this very elementary design. So 9-patch, as many of you know, is one of the first things that many quilt makers are taught, even as children. It's simple, it's 9 equal size squares, and then they can be put together in a variety of ways. And this quilt maker, again, unidentified, figured out a way to organize this to make it whirl. Let's go to a detail of it. You can see it's a tied quilt. It's tied in every single block, every single square. Is that true? I think so. Or maybe it's possible. You know, I see now it's the 5. She tied it in every one of the 5 blocks that make up the 9 patches, and then interspersed them with these rectangles that created this overall design that I have never seen anybody do anything like this before. It's a unique vision in that way. And I'm particularly drawn to quilts that are relatively easy to make, but realized and organized in a way that would make them unique, memorable, one of a kind. And as far as I know, that's what we have here. So just as an aside, when I designed the my partner at that time, my business partner Jean Demeter, and I designed this poster and sent this and this as possibilities. and they didn't like it. They ended up with that first one with the quilt right in the middle, in any case. As I said earlier, all of this brought me to the question of what in fact is a masterpiece. I think it goes really deep. This is a book that came out many years ago where Shelley Ziegert chose, actually she didn't. She asked people, and I was one of them, to present her with a quilt that they felt was a masterpiece to go in this book. And I was asked as the curator of the Esprit collection to provide one, and I did. I'm not even going to show you anything within it. But I came upon this the other day, and I thought this is somebody's idea of asking the question, what is a masterpiece? And that's as much as anything of interest to me in this conversation. We've referred to some of the things that we feel are make up the criteria, but I think that it's worth a further discussion. So let's do that. Let's just do that.
Quilts can be seen from so many different ways. And maybe that's why we're having trouble saying there's just one type of masterpiece.
I think that it applies to all art. The question of what's a masterpiece. It changes through, we know it changes through time. It changes through geography. It's incredibly subjective, which means that it's going to fall into, it's going to bring up questions of social questions and political questions. And let's just think about it from the beginning. Where did the word come from? I mean, I looked it up. I got really interested. It was guild members showing their work to the master.
Right.
And the master decided which was the object or the piece of art that fit his, and I make sure I'm saying his, not her, because the master was always a man, his criteria. So like somebody pointed out to me the other day, because I've been discussing this with friends, master bathroom is no longer a term, right? It's the primary bathroom or something like that, because of the sexist connotation. Anyway,
And I
I
would
think
push
that-
back against that just slightly, in the sense that, you know, of course the guilds were all men and they wouldn't admit women, and you know, there were, you know, certain things like you know, women were allowed to be embroiderers in a sort of separate sort of way of professional embroiderers in a way. But I think the premise is that someone who was the master and the people who were the elite people in the guild, they had the wherewithal to judge because they had the experience, and they had attained the technical skills and superiority that did in a way put them in a position to judge the production of the younger people who are coming up to be judged by them, and to say, yes, this presents the right amount of skill. What that system doesn't allow for is a lot of tolerance necessarily for innovation. So, you know, you fast forward to, you know, the Impressionists, and I'm sure we would all agree that something like Sunday afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, or you know, some of Monet's things, or the, you know, the Déjeuner sur l'herbe, you know, all of those we consider masterpieces, but they weren't recognized as such at the time because they did not conform to the prevailing you know, in a sense, artistic guild system of the academy. So a masterpiece might go unrecognized because it breaks norms and so on. However, if we're judging now, I think we've broken out of a lot of that narrow-minded definition of it has to conform to certain things. And I think our definitions are being very, very permissive.
you know,
I think that
along those lines, I was thinking about how the idea of, I used to be asked to judge quilt shows, and I'm not a quilt maker, so I obviously didn't come at it from a technical. I won't do it anymore. And here's a big presumption I'm going to make, and I just want to say it. I'm of the opinion, I'm leaning toward believing that the reason that there are so many fabulous, maybe not even masterpiece quilts, but such great quilts from the 19th century is there was no master. There was no master. And nobody was looking, men were not looking at the quilts and judging them and saying, this fits the criteria. And
love
women were
this.
freer. Women
I
were
love
freer
this.
I love it too.
to get
Yeah.
out of the box, you know? And I quit judging because I still don't like it. I still don't like that. I tell a story, I think I already told it about, you know, the judges that wouldn't allow a quilt in because the batting didn't go out to the edge of the binding.
Oh, I know. The rules, the rules.
Yeah, the rules. But the idea is that while there were competitions or contests or fair prizes, you know, green blue ribbons or whatever, you were so much freer to do what you wanted to do in quilts because no man was looking over your shoulder.
Well, and let's refer back to our discussion of what won the Sears competition. It wasn't that fabulous technical virtuoso and absolutely graphically fabulous and new and different swirl of colors. It was a conventional, stupid little ripoff of an 1850s wreath quilt.
And
So
And
which
nice
is the
stuffing,
masterpiece.
And the women, and all were women judges. Oh.
Yeah, well,
No, yeah,
but
we can't blame it
bound
all
by
on men.
convention.
Yeah, but what another thing I think that was missing from your idea, Alden, was one race was represented. One race was represented, and we're still fighting that.
Sure.
At least we're making progress, but they weren't looking at the folk arts. They weren't looking at what how people were creating their, you know, rakes or pots or quilts.
And they weren't giving credit to the artisans who were doing the sewing. I think many of those masterpiece quilts were quilted by people who were enslaved.
As I was pointing out, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the design may have been Mary Key's, but she was using the work of others.
They all
probably.
looked at her and they said, "Ma'am, we can't quilt this. It'll never lay flat."
Yeah, it'll never lie flat.
But many of them were flat enough to quilt. One of my favorite things I found in my local fair was in the 70s or 80s, 1870s or 80s. They had two prizes, one for the best executed quilt and one for the best designed quilt. And that is, those are the two things. I think it's not men that have dictated to us. And I don't mean to be mean to some of you, but it's home economics.
Home economics.
You just opened up a whole other fighting words discussion.
Right, I know some of you have been. I took a lot of home ec. I flunked. I mean, I really literally just about flunked because I'm such a slob.
So
But there's rules.
to kind of end with the Harriet Powers quilt, because we have Kyra here. Think about that quilt being made at that time. I don't think where was she getting those ideas?
Well, I'd love to. We need to talk about it in context.
Yeah,
Because it is in its context. The colors are context,
right.
and the idea of a biblical story. And a Noah's Ark quilt was very common at the time.
Well,
But
very
not like her.
but we're
But
talking
you
about
see others.
we're talking
It
about a
was-
slave. We're talking about a woman who'd been a slave. And
Well, this is 40
I
years
want
later,
Kyra to
50 years, 30 years.
talk about, I know we don't have much time, but what about the influence of the Dahomey designs?
The influence of the what kind of designs?
Dahomey, like where the
Africa.
one of the countries where the slaves came
Yeah.
from? That,
So
yeah.
I know that there's a
Julie,
school
I'm
of
not
thought
buying it.
that says there's some remembrance of Africa and bringing those symbols and so forth into the quilts. I have not studied that in order to say that.
Mhm.
But for Mrs. Powers, I can't help but think of two things as we've had this conversation. One is, what would she consider the body of her work to be the masterpiece? Because in a letter that she wrote that was located in Keokuk, Iowa, she talked about something called the Lord's Supper quilt.
Which we
Mhm.
don't
So
know
there's
what it
another
is.
pictorial quilt.
Wow.
We don't know where it is.
Oh.
And so we know what we see and what survived, but what does she think is masterpiece level or favorite or most loved? The other thing I think about is there is a picture of, or a stereograph, help me if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, of the Bible quilt that the Smithsonian has when it was on display at the Atlanta Cotton Exposition. And if you look in the
have that picture.
background, oh, you
I
do?
was trying to show that picture, but I can't find it here. I will
Okay.
show it on our Facebook page.
Okay, in the background,
It's
there's two
phenomenal to find that. Yeah.
And do you know that somebody stole that? I borrowed that photograph from a library up in the East. And a couple years later, when I wanted to use it again, they said, it's not here. Somebody walked off with it. But anyway, that's a different.
Oh, interesting. Because
Have
I
you-
first saw that on your writing. It's
think
phenomenal. Here's her
background-
quilt.
Look in the background of that Atlanta Cotton, because there's two things. There's a pine
Burr,
um,
pine burr,
Yeah,
pine burr.
pine bird.
and there's also in a case, a glass case, there's the Lord's Prayer quilt. And it's all applique words of the
Ooh.
Lord's Prayer. So I don't know if in Athens, Georgia, and in that community, Mrs. Powers' quilt was as unusual as we might think of it today. Yeah, look at that pine bird. That must be
Pine bird.
heaven.
And look at the woman there. She's running this is the colored people's display. Look at that Lord's Prayer.
Yeah,
And
there's
the things we cannot see. But here it is. It's just amazing.
What else have we lost? What else have we lost?
yeah. And
Yeah.
people who thought, I need to make sure other people see it. So Jenny Smith said, I need to make sure other people see the Bible quilt.
Bless her,
But
bless
Lamb
her.
University said, let's give it as a gift. And the Hall family said, we need to make sure that people saw this quilt. Because the Jenny Smith, the Bible quilt, after Jenny Smith died, it stayed with her executor of her will for like 20 years before they sent it to the museum.
Mhm.
Had
We
she
can't
not
go on like
specified what
this.
should happen to it, or?
Oh my God, you gotta read the will. Get the will,
Okay.
like 20
Get that
bucks.
will. Get the
Okay.
give us a link to the will. I mean, the whole thing is just fascinating. And it, you could go down to Georgia, which is where Harriet was from, and sort of just poke around in the antique stores. Maybe someday you'll find the third or the fourth or the
If
fifth.
it's there, it's in Keokuk, Iowa. In my belief, it's.
That's
in-
where her quilts might be.
Yeah,
Hey, I'm not that far from Keokuk.
we'll talk afterwards.
All right.
Okay.
And we will post all these questions and answers and opinions on our Facebook page, and we'll send you the link. So we're
I
going to
know
the
it's been
conversation.
thank you very much for coming.
once we got our
Thank you, Kyra.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
our technical
So
stuff
nice to
worked
see
out.
you.
It was a good session.
was a good
We
session.
love doing this.
Did you know you can watch our previous episodes on Vimeo? Vimeo.com/quiltdistrict/VOD_pages. Or you can search for the 6 Know-It-Alls when you go to the main page of Vimeo.com. You can also catch our first 3 episodes, which are free, on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to our YouTube channel, or you can go to youtube.com and search for the 6 Know-It-Alls. You can also find all the updates and links to previous episodes on quiltdistrict.com. Go to quiltdistrict.com and then the 6 Know-It-Alls tab, and there you'll find all the upcoming episode information, as well as the background on how the 6 Know-It-Alls got started and some biography information on all of the Know-It-Alls. You'll also want to be sure you put your email address in here so that you can get notified of upcoming events straight to your email inbox.
And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool. This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker, Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
interesting.
And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the lady sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. And I wonder if it's belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the foot bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug.
The thing is, and this goes back to Lynne too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.